Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1, audiobook by Kevin Chapter 19. Training magic. As they stood and deposited their plates, Nathan took note of the heir's weaponry. Stella bore a tall and knotted staff, deeply carved with runes, and with each knot inlaid with a glowing gem. Kachai picked up a polished steel kite shield that must have weighed at least 40 pounds and a hammer that looked fit for demolishing walls. Interestingly, Sarah and Arl didn't have any weapons, just wide pouches they wore like forward-facing fanny packs. Nathan would have bet dollars to donuts that those were bags of holding. As they trooped outside, other trainees headed towards various training areas, with Jalba and a few other older adventurers talking to groups or supervising various activities. The heirs ignored them all and strode around the side of the building, towards the very back corner of the guild complex. Another team was also moving in that direction, but they saw the heirs approaching and decided to go somewhere else, ceding the private range of sand to the heirs without a word or overt glance. The area didn't have fancy magical targets, consisting simply of a walled rectangle floored in coarse sand. The targets set against a dirt berm against the far wall were a series of X-shapes rather than bullseyes, but served the same purpose. Nathan followed Kachai and Arl out onto the center of the course while Stella and Sarah closed the gate and stayed back. Nathan stepped to the left, took off his shirt and sat down on the sand. He didn't recognize the exact meaning of the hand gesture that Arl threw his way, but it was pretty clearly something along the lines of, "What the hell, man?" He gestured toward Stella. "I want to try eating a fireball and it's easier like this. Go ahead, shoot." With those words, Nathan focused on Stella, opening his senses to get everything he could out of what would follow. Nathan used focused mind to shape his attention, mimicking the state of mind that had helped him gain notice. With a moment of stilled breath, everything Nathan observed gained a level of definition. Stella shrugged, looked at Kachai and said, "I'll start off with half a blow since I don't want to knock your head off within an hour of meeting you. That's the sort of treatment you earn." Then, with a flicking gesture, she sent a globe of fire sailing toward Nathan. She didn't speak the name of the spell like the Giant's Rest mages do. It was faster, more concentrated than the fireball that the guardian golem had thrown at him, but also smaller and not nearly as bright. Nathan barely had a chance to blink before the burning, ping-pong ball-sized orb impacted his chest, and flame washed over him. He tried to pick apart the knot of the spell as it detonated, but the spellwork blew apart as it touched him. Nathan was left with the feeling of fire and force mana raging against his bare skin, trying to burn him and blow him backward. Nathan failed to separate the two before his back impacted the ground, a burning sensation lingering in his chest. Nathan felt mana at play there and picked it apart, feeling a hot, fizzling sensation. It reminded him of the popping of a fire, with its frequent and spontaneous bursts of heat. It was not very pleasant, but the sensation faded quickly and left him with a mild burn on his chest. He healed it with a quick application of stamina, sitting back up to find the rest of the heirs watching him closely. Kachai had taken a step toward him, his hand beginning to gather faint yellow light. But then he saw Nathan's reddened skin fade before his eyes and he paused, suddenly confused. He opened his mouth to speak. "You're not a spellcaster, but you healed yourself, and that fireball was weird." "Stella," she shook her head, frowning. "It didn't explode right." Nathan shrugged. "Seems so." He looked down at his chest where burnt, shiny skin was healing over, scattered hair growing back at incredible speed. He was confused about this because that wasn't how burns worked. If there had been enough heat to burn him, that heat should have stayed around and continued to burn until he'd cooled the area down with water or something. But as soon as he got rid of the fire mana, the heat had also gone away. The heat itself is magical, not just the mana that made it. He looked back up at Stella. "I think I'll need a few more to figure this out properly. Can you try throwing it a little slower and maybe make it detonate slower? Stella looked bemused. That's not very easy. Only a few mages in Gemor could modify a spell like that. She paused for effect. Luckily, I'm one of them, but I'll only do it if you tell me what you're doing. Nathan responded with a wide grin. You'll see. Gimme another. I'll spell it out for you if you can't figure it out. Arl groaned. Great. Now there's two of them. At least they can be smug at each other. After a moment of pouting, Stella tossed another fireball at him. This one was a bit larger, a bit more diffuse, and flew a bit slower. It hit Nathan's chest and burned for a moment before detonating. But the detonation was weak, the fireball's structure starting to fall apart the moment it touched Nathan's skin. He sat back up, thinking about the spell. He'd felt the weave of it this time, how the mana had been loosely woven together. When it hit him, the force had expanded out to create a shockwave that had activated and scattered the pattern of fire mana, generating a blast of explosive heat and pressure across a wide area. It was like a fuel-air bomb, where an initial blast scattered fuel across a wide area, which then ignited to cause the real destruction. Low tier Identify 3 achieved. Neat. Nathan wouldn't be able to reproduce the spell, and he also definitely couldn't grasp how to design a spell like that from the ground up. But he understood how it worked and how to make it fail. Ahead of him, Stella frowned, her mouth lopsided and surprisingly cute as she glared at where the fireball had detonated. And again, she hucked another fireball at him, just as diffuse as the previous one. Nathan sharpened his magical senses, waiting for the exact moment he could interact with the spell, preparing himself to pull apart the tendrils of force mana that provided the initial detonation. The fireball impacted his navel and guttered as he scattered the key threads of force mana. He was left with an uncomfortable ball of fire and force slowly dissipating against his belly. Nathan pulled on the mana the way he'd done with Tial's chains of restraint, and the hissing ball fizzed away to nothing. At this point, Stella's frown had turned into a sort of delighted puzzlement. I have never seen anything like that before. Hold on, let me try something. You can heal yourself, right? Nathan nodded, all of a sudden apprehensive as the short mage stalked toward him, her smile growing into something maniacal. Give me your hand. She grabbed the tentatively offered limb in one hand and pointed with the other. A thin jet of flame shot from her pointer finger and she brought it toward Nathan's outstretched arm. Break this spell. I want to see how it works. Nathan flinched, almost pulling his arm out of her grasp, but Stella held on and touched the edge of the fire against his arm, near his wrist. Nathan felt the mana as soon as it contacted him, a concentrated and surprisingly complex working of fire. Nathan focused intently on the spell, hoping he could keep Stella from lopping off his hand with her magical cutting torch. The spell seemed dedicated to keeping the flame as concentrated as possible, so that was the aspect of the spell that Nathan attacked. As the torch contacted his skin, the flames barely felt warm, the major sensation being the popping energy of fire mana. The angle was shallow, and even without his magic resistance, the fire would have burnt him but not scorched deeply. Oh, she's not actually trying to hurt me. She's just not great at communicating when she's excited. More methodically, he pulled apart the weave that kept the flames concentrated. The jet became more diffuse before the threads snapped back into place. Nathan looked up and saw Stella staring intently at the jet, obviously exerting her own magical control to stabilize the spell. His own eyes narrowed. Oh, it's like that, is it? You might be the mage, but I'm the antimage. Any spell you make, I can break. Nathan pushed back, destabilizing the working even as Stella tried to force it back into shape. His talent's basic function protected him from harm and made his manipulations of the spell inherently disruptive. Even though it was Stella's mana and she had the advantage, they fought for control of the little jet of fire. After a minute of back and forth, Nathan fully understood the nature of the spell, and how it worked. Around Stella's finger was a portion of the spell that channeled air into the flame jet. Fire mana needs an oxidizer to burn. Then I guess the fireball working like a fuel-air explosive makes even more sense. That's both reassuring and very weird. It's magic. Why does it follow the rules of chemical reactions? I guess it would also be weird if it didn't. Nathan abandoned his manipulation of the guiding magic and attacked the air inflow control, causing the fire itself to flicker. When Stella tried to stabilize that portion of the spell, Nathan took advantage of her diverted attention, disrupting the part of the spell that provided fire mana. Stella let go of the spell and stepped back, letting out a long breath and slumping her shoulders. Then she looked up and threw her arms to the sky in a pose of triumph. Mana intuition went up. Dragon's breath, that's awesome. She turned to Nathan, cheeks flushed. Okay, that was cool. Thanks for going along with it. Is there anything else you want to try? She grinned and winked, throwing Nathan off a bit. He took a second to respond, examining the slightly singed hair on his arm. Do you have any other mana types? I'm trying to develop my magic resistance talent, and I think I need exposure to as many mana types as possible. If not, I'd like to play with a spell that's pure force. Stella's energy and grin dialed back a few stages. No, I don't have any other types of mana except fire and force. Yet, but hold some patience and I might be able to set something up. I've never heard of a talent like yours. It's amazing. She gave Nathan a hand, boosting him to his feet before continuing. Oh, and I know you're from far off, but don't tell anybody what types of mana I use or that skill name I mentioned. Supposed to be secret, though if you're on the team it won't be a problem. She proceeded to cast another spell wordlessly. A sheet of translucent blue force appeared in front of Nathan, about the size of a large shield. Nathan walked over to it, inspecting the floating magic. It looked more like the force constructs he'd seen from the Guardians of Gemor than anything from Giant's Rest. Nathan had seen much the same spell cast by the Giant's Rest mages at the Battle of the Ford, but it hadn't looked like this. Theirs had been smaller and completely transparent. Differences in spellcasting style maybe. Stella doesn't speak the spell names aloud as she casts. I can see that providing a tactical advantage but maybe being harder to learn. He poked it with his finger, which let him feel the broad, flat bands of mana that formed the shield. They bent under his finger and the pane of force audibly cracked. Nathan nodded to himself, considering the feeling of force mana. It was massless but immovable, as if its position were immutable. Pushing on it from any angle felt like pushing on the edge of a knife that never quite cut you. That contrasted with fire mana, which he'd had more than enough experience with during the mental wrestling match over Stella's torch. Fire was an ever-changing popping sensation combined with heat like scorching hot pop rocks. Not a very pleasant sensation, but it was nice to easily be able to identify it. Low-tier spell sense 6 achieved. With another movement, Nathan traced one of the major weaves of mana in the force block, which crumbled. The entire pane of force shuddered and collapsed into nothing. The other members of the heirs had been half-heartedly stretching, but mostly just watching Nathan and Stella do their thing. At Nathan's casual destruction of the force block, Kachai looked as if he'd finally solved a riddle. So that's how you wounded an archmage through his mage armor. Break the magic, break the man. What he hit you with. Nathan hissed, rubbing his previously absent left arm. A disintegrate which took off my left arm. He waved the appendage in question at Kachai, who looked aghast. I grew it back, though. The wolfman worked his jaw for a moment, exposing some impressive teeth as he reconsidered Nathan. That's one zombie of a healing talent. It's gotta be a talent. Does it heal non-magical wounds too? Nathan nodded. With the insight I have, I don't think it matters where the injury comes from. Kachai stroked his elongated chin, whistling appreciatively and looking thoughtful. After a moment, he grinned quite wolfishly. In that case, want to spar? Chapter 20 bumps and bruises Nathan's side. He had been hoping that the anti-magic demonstration had allayed their worries, and they wouldn't test him anymore. Maybe this spar was Katja trying to get a fully rounded grasp of Nathan's capabilities, and not just beat his face in to demonstrate his superiority. If only I had confidence in that. As much as Nathan wasn't looking forward to getting smacked around by the enormous wolfman, it wasn't a big surprise. He turned to fully face him. Sure, but I have to warn you that the first time I seriously fought anybody was less than a week ago. I've had luck catching mages by surprise, but I'm not going to stand up well to somebody like you. Katja and Arl looked happier at Nathan's earnest assessment. He noticed that they'd both been tense, apprehensive because of his anti-magic demonstration. This was probably a good time to clear that up. I don't think I'm ever going to be as good a frontline fighter as you guys. I definitely need to work on it, but I've got skills for fast movement and dealing with magic. I'm a mage hunter, but against non-mages, a lot of what I have is useless. Sarah pursed her lips. Not all adventuring parties fight people. Many focus on dungeons and monsters. What else can you do where anti-magic is not as useful? Nathan's response was easy. I'm not familiar with many monsters in this area, but my guess is the scary ones use magic in some way. The grave tangle knocked everybody over with just its magical aura, which I ignored. I also saw through the magical stealth of a pack of earth stalkers yesterday. He shrugged. But maybe those were outliers. How many magical traps or dangers are present in dungeons? Sarah shared a look with Arl, who shrugged and wiggled his eyebrows at her. She nodded as if acknowledging a point and spoke again. Fair enough. Now are you two going to hit each other or what? Unless you want a weapon, Nathan. I have no idea how to use any weapons but my fists, and I'd prefer not to look like an absolute rookie. Nathan shook his head and squared off against Katja. He considered putting his shirt back on but decided against potentially damaging his new clothes. He took a deep breath as they both set their feet, sizing up his opponent. He didn't expect to take the big guy down or even get in any significant shots. Katja was dressed in immaculate plate and bore a large hammer and an even bigger shield. His hope here was to be slippery, maybe get behind the big warrior or trip him up. He's in full plate. That's gotta be heavy as hell. Maybe I can just push him over. Nathan noticed Katja crouch slightly as if to lunge, and Nathan took a cautious step backward. They were more than 10 feet apart. There was no way somebody covered in that much metal could cover that distance. Nathan's next thought was interrupted by the steel wall of Katja's shield impacting his chin with a crunch. Darkness fuzzed his vision and he was airborne briefly before slamming into the ground, wind partially knocked out of him. It hurt like a bitch, but thanks to Brawler's indifference, he wasn't completely stunned. His jaw felt wobbly and he rolled to his feet and spat out a mouthful of blood before staggering to the side and falling over again as the world tilted. Oh, that's a nasty concussion. I think you got me. I'm gonna need a minute. Nathan was not a fan of how much his voice slurred and speaking sent intense pain through his jaw, even through the recognizable numbness of broken bones. His hands came up and Nathan tentatively poked at his face. Yeah, that was a badly broken jaw, and a concussion. Would regeneration work on head wounds? Did he want to use it for head wounds? Well, it was probably better to try it now under controlled circumstances. Controlled head wounds. No such thing. Nathan pictured a textbook diagram of a brain, unbruised and surrounded by healthy meninges. Then he shoved that image at his own head along with stamina. Stamina drained at an alarming rate, but over the course of a few heartbeats, a mental fog he hadn't even noticed cleared away. His jaw was also killing him, and he became aware that Katja was leaning over him, hand glowing as he finished a prayer. Grace be granted, healing be sure. Katja pressed his hand onto Nathan's shoulder, and Nathan felt the magic try to take hold before sliding off, accomplishing nothing. It had the same feel as the magic he'd felt from Kia, a warm, prickling feeling that Nathan was powerless to accept. In that moment, he almost reconsidered his decision to improve his magic resistance to be more potent. Maybe healing was more important, and regeneration was taking a while. Nathan started coughing up blood as Katja grew more anxious and chagrined. "What do I do? Can you heal it?" Nathan sat up, spitting to the side and feeling very pressured. Why was he having to reassure people when he was the one who'd been injured? "Yeah, give me a minute." He felt delicately at his jaw. There was a sharp bone protruding into his mouth, and the feeling of his tongue caressing a shard of his own bone did not feel great. Ah, that feels very wrong. But he could make the problem go away, so Nathan closed his eyes and crossed his legs, sharpening his mind. His jaw was definitely misaligned, and he didn't want it healing that way. This is getting to me on a visceral level that's hard to ignore. He tamped down on the rising sickness and focused on the correct jaw structure. He told the bones not just to heal but also to shift into the right position, and only to heal after they'd finished moving. It was unpleasant, Nathan's attention barraged by discomfort and the blood that continued to fill his mouth. But he was patient, breathing through his nose and dedicating his entire attention to realigning his jawbones before healing the skin and fusing the bones together. After a minute, that felt much longer, Nathan opened his eyes to more blue boxes. Mid-tier focused mind rank 5 achieved. Mid-tier regeneration rank 7 achieved. So getting possibly crippling wounds also helps with ranks, the smallest hurrah. The rest of the heirs were grouped around him, looking various degrees of aloof or concerned. Stella ventured a question first. "Are you all right?" Nathan cracked his jaw. Thankfully, it was back to normal. "Yeah, I think so. Anybody got some water? My mouth is full of blood." Sarah handed him a water skin, and Nathan washed himself and spat a few times, gargling and then drinking to get the sticky feeling out of his throat. Then he handed the water skin back to Sarah with a nod of thanks before standing and turning to Katja. "This is going to need to be handled carefully." "You sure got me with that one. I didn't know you could move that quick." "Nice. But I got a question. Does your healing realign bones or just heal things as they are?" Katja scuffed the ground with his foot, looking away. "It depends on the prayer. Mom always taught me to check for misaligned bones before healing somebody." His posture told Nathan that he hadn't used a prayer that realigned bones this time. But at least the big wolfhook's first response had been to panic and try to help, instead of just laughing at Nathan. Nathan nodded. "It's a good thing I was immune to your healing, or I probably wouldn't be able to talk right now. We'd have to carefully re-break my jaw, set it and re-heal it. Not fun for anybody. Just be careful with that next time. Just because somebody's hurt it doesn't mean healing them is always the right action." "Yeah." Katja looked up at him and grimaced. "You are right. It was just, you were hurt, it was my fault and I could help, so I didn't think about it as I should have." Nathan shrugged. "No harm, no foul. As much as I got my face beat in, I think I won that round in the social arena." Katja nodded. "Shall we go again?" His eyes had narrowed and looked a bit predatorily at Nathan. Maybe Nathan had rubbed his nose in it too much. To Nathan's surprise, Stella came to his rescue. "No, definitely not. Nathan is going to sit down and you slackers are going to do the training you were supposed to be doing. Sarah, make it a good one." She glared at Katja. Stella guided Nathan to a set of benches at the back of the range, where he sat and watched Sarah hurling weapons at Arl and Katja. Her hands flickered in and out of her pouch, each time a new weapon in hand. They all quickly went down range at the two fighters. The variety of weapons was amazing, as well as the speed and accuracy at which they flew. Nathan noticed that all of the weapons were blunted. Nonetheless, arrows, hatchets, knives, and javelins all went clattering down range. If you can dodge a wrench, Arl acted similarly, pulling out weapons from his own pouch with each movement to counter his sister's attacks. He swatted a hatchet from the air with one of his own, then produced a small shield to catch an arrow before sidestepping a javelin. It would have been more efficient just keeping the shield, but the slim man was clearly practicing swapping weapons for each threat. Meanwhile, Kachai's job looked easier. He was hunkering behind his shield, shifting it to catch and deflect ranged projectiles. It definitely wasn't trivial, as Nathan noticed that whenever he took his eyes off Sarah, she'd hurl something into the sky, so it would come down atop his head unless he adjusted his shield or sidestepped. She also sent the occasional projectile at his feet, forcing him to slam the shield down or skip backwards. It was almost comical, seeing the enormous warrior in plate armor shuffling in place as blurs of metal came from multiple angles. Nathan's stamina was at 95/350, so he asked Stella if she had any snacks. She smirked, reached into a pocket of her robes and handed him a set of pastries that looked identical to the ones Nathan had eaten that morning. They were pristine and still warm. He looked at her robe with surprise. "Better keep me away from that. I think I'll break any magic items that I'm too close to." Stella looked at him with alarm. She'd been edging a bit closer to him but reversed course and scooted further down the bench. "Hear me, that talent's powerful, but I'm definitely not jealous anymore. Can't be healed, can't use magic items. Not even as a joke." She shuddered a bit. They sat in silence for a little while, watching as Sarah finally emptied her pouch of practice weapons. Once she was finished, they gathered up the projectiles while Kachai healed a few bruises and scrapes. Nathan hopped up to help, grabbing a few daggers and hatchets. They were all badly scuffed and dented, more like discards from a forge than actual weapons. He watched Sarah dump the weapons into the pouch, shaking his head. The item must have sorted and cleaned them as well, since she wasn't being careful to avoid getting sand in there. Wild. He handed off his gathered items. Sarah looked up at him. She'd been the most aloof thus far, but Nathan didn't get a sense of dislike. Merely that she hadn't taken the lead here. "Thanks. Do you want to go? I can go gentle." Nathan considered. He could do it. Being willing to get clobbered again would probably improve his reputation with the heirs, but he just didn't want to. His jaw didn't hurt anymore, but the memory of the pain was still there, and he just didn't want to take more risks. Not today, so he blew out a breath and responded, "Thanks for the offer, but not today. There's something I want to talk to Arthur about before I try dodging things." Sarah cocked her head at him. "Arthur Footspeak. Stainel, our dad, says he's one to trust true. What's he teaching you?" Nathan blinked. "Yeah, that's him. The giant traders saved me from Giant's Rest, and he's teaching me the path of rage." The black-haired girl was clearly surprised. "That's rare." She turned to call to Arl, who was gathering javelins that flown past him during the target practice. "Hey Arl, don't you know Nathan's getting taught the path of rage by Arthur Footspeak?" Arl grunted, looking Nathan up and down again. "That's a surprise. They guard those insights. He'll have to answer to the clan for that." He turned to Nathan. "What could have made him agree to that?" Nathan scratched the back of his neck. "If it's so valuable, I don't know if that's something I should share." To his surprise, everybody seemed to accept that explanation. The culture here really did get behind hoarding insights, and disapproved of even the hint of prying them out of people. He and Stella sat and watched as the rest of the heirs resumed their practice. After just a few minutes, Stella sat back up and started throwing magic at Arl and Kachai, forcing them to dodge or shelter from various small bolts of fire or force. Nathan thought she was picking on Kachai, and he was being slowly driven down the range by a rain of firebolts and one small fireball impacting his shield. After a bit they called another break, sitting around and drinking water. Stella broke the silence first. "Sorry for trying to trip you back in the dining hall. I thought, well..." Nathan shrugged again. Holding onto grudges against these people wouldn't get him anything. They'd been jerks, but the culture here seemed rooted in proving one's strength. And honestly, it made sense. If you were adventurers going up against Giant's Rest and monsters, You had a lot more excuse to be macho than high school football players did. And before I can really join their team, they have to see me as an equal, somebody just as strong and with as much potential as they have. You thought I wasn't the equal of you and the other heirs, but I'm heir to a tradition as weighty as they come. In my land, we stand on the shoulders of giants, on our predecessors who reached the stars. It lets us see farther yet, plumb the mysteries of the universe. It's something I dedicated my life to, and now I will apply that legacy here. Low-tier earnestness, rank 8 achieved. There was a beat of silence before the moment was ruined by Arl's quiet question. What's a star? Nathan blew a raspberry, thinking about how to explain. It's something beyond the sky. We can see them from my home. Soon enough, the group training was over, and it was time for individual mentoring. Chapter 21. Dodging disadvantage, the heirs exited the private training ground to find the other adventurers milling around in an open area, waiting on their individual mentors. Nathan spotted Arthur easily and started walking in his direction, but was stopped by Katja, holding out a hand to interrupt him. Today we're having food with our families. Maybe another day you will share our dinner, but for today, we will see you back in our rooms. I have inscribed our meeting, Nathan. With that, the big wolfman turned and walked away with the rest of the heirs. Arl and Sarah approached a wiry, older man who was clearly their father, with the same coppery skin, dark hair, and sculpted face. Katja and Stella walked together, joking as they strode towards the familiar figures that Nathan had last seen incinerating the grave tangle. 3 of the 5 members of the Guardians of Gemor stood together, a wide buffer of open space around them. Kia was in full plate armor, with the giant greatsword stuck diagonally on her back. Her helmet was off, but it was hanging off her belt and in easy reach. Nathan watched Katja approach and respectfully greet her, and she responded by jerking her head for him to follow. Meanwhile, Stella was greeted by hugs from both of the casters of the Guardians. Nathan remembered the spell he'd been pretty sure involved a fusion reaction, and eyed the soft-faced man who'd cast the spell. From here he seemed shy, even effacing, while the foxfolk at his side was more effusive, cupping Stella's cheeks and asking her a question. Stella's response involved pointing at Nathan. All 3 turned to face him. Nathan stopped watching them and sped up to meet Arthur. He needed to keep in mind that the parents of his new friends could beat the pants off a monster the size of a mountain, one whose attacks had broken the sound barrier. No wonder they wanted to keep most people at arm's length. That kind of power was bound to make nearly any social situation difficult. How did you talk to somebody when their parents were WMDs? Forget the trope of a dad threatening people with a shotgun. This would be like dealing with the daughter of a superhero. That's really not a terrible metaphor here. They're even named like a superhero team. With that in mind, he went to meet Arthur. Talking to Arthur again was easy. He didn't have to judge the effect of every word or worry so much about his image. He'd fought for Arthur, and Arthur had fought for him. Back on Earth, Nathan wouldn't have any idea what that meant. But here now, it meant that he wasn't quite so worried about how mere words would cause the big elk centaur to think of him. It was surprisingly restful to have that feeling. So, when Arthur took him to a secluded park on the edge of the adventuring compound, he didn't restrain his speech. Did you see the team I was on? They're so young and exhausting. Arthur seemed to think that was funny, chuckling as they walked. Indeed, it speaks highly of you to be placed in such a team, but it has often been said that those born to greatness forever struggle to achieve it. I hope your team flourishes at their task, but now we have training to do. Is there anything in particular you wish to focus on? Nathan had been thinking about this. I want to get some help from Emerald on something. Otherwise, whatever you think is best. They spent a few hours talking of the path of rage, and Arthur ran him through a few exercises. Many of them had him focusing on what made him angry and ways to control and channel that feeling. Arthur had him feel for the anger, taught him to think of it as something that was always present and could be called on whenever necessary. It was clear to Nathan that the path of rage was a balancing act disguised as a surrender to emotion. In order to truly embark on the path, you had to let your anger overwhelm you. However, you could still shape the path that the anger took, like guiding a raging torrent down certain channels. Nathan was glad he had Arthur to teach him. There was an art to this not unlike his guided meditation. It was purpose without thought. After some time they went to find Emerald, and Nathan asked them to run him through the footwork drill again. After a few repetitions, he asked both Arthur and Emerald to throw some things at him, and he tried to use the movements from the drill to dodge. It didn't go great, at least at first. Arthur had grabbed whatever was at hand, and so Nathan dodged a rain of random chunks of wood and tools. He protested, noting that they could be using pillows or clothes, but Arthur pointed out that Davrar didn't tend to respect non-hazardous training. So Nathan resigned himself to some bruises and got to dodging. At first he was tempted to duck and weave, keeping his body weight low and stance even. But that wasn't the point of what he was trying to do. He wanted to use the techniques that Emerald had taught him to quickly shift position and allow for sudden changes of direction. After a few false starts, and a couple of times where Emerald specifically pegged Nathan in the foot, he started to get into it. The trick wasn't just to be light on your feet, it was to be careful and considerate of your momentum, and to be ready to change it at any time. Pending utility skill, low-tier dodging footwork you have trained in moving your feet quickly to aid with dodging. This skill will help you move your feet to more easily keep your balance and dodge attacks. He stopped moving and got belted with a metal ladle for his trouble. Quickly, Arthur and Emerald stopped and Emerald approached him. "Why, you got it, good, I was hungry." They sat down to eat what Arthur had quickly fetched and Nathan nodded. "It's called dodging footwork, says it will help me keep my balance and dodge attacks." Emerald hesitated before answering, heaping vegetables onto a plate from a communal tray. "Mine is more general B, but doesn't mention dodging. J just says easier movement and faster C changes of direction." Nathan was a bit surprised, speaking around a buttered roll stuffed with meat and gravy. "That sounds even more general. Nice. It's a really good skill." Emerald shrugged their shoulders in response to the compliment, while Arthur came forward. "Well done. It seems that many of your utility skills are geared towards fighting. While this is not a bad thing, I would caution you of making all of your skills related to combat and adventuring. Not only will it leave you unable to perform well in other areas, but it may make you feel trapped in this life, unable to imagine yourself acquiring other skills, other crafts." He paused, then spoke again. "I apologize for seeding your garden with weeds. To achieve a skill one has been reaching for is truly something to be proud of. This one is not to be dismissed, for it takes long training to achieve such a thing. Indeed, I wonder at the speed at which you have picked up your talents and skills in this place." Nathan considered if he should mention Davrar, deeming him disadvantaged. Well, it probably wasn't the most dangerous secret that these two already knew, and understanding it would probably help with his training. So he told them. "About that, when I arrived on Davrar, I got a message that I was at a disadvantage, and so I would have an easier time getting skills and talents and level up faster until I wasn't at a disadvantage. Do either of you know when that'll happen?" Arthur furrowed his brow, tilting his head and staring to the side as he mopped his plate with another roll. "I've never heard of such a thing, not among my clan or in Gemor. Emerald?" Emerald's voice was quiet. "I've overheard the words. It's something from Giant's Rest for noble kids, B, but I don't know what it means." Nathan shrugged. "It seems fairly simple from what I have seen. If you don't have any levels, then you get some sort of boost to help you catch up. I think it's helped me learn better versions of talents and skills too. I'm not surprised Giant's Rest takes advantage of it. Keep a kid from leveling up for a while and then they'll get better stuff later. I just wish I knew when it expired." Both Arthur and Emerald were taken aback. Arthur spoke first. "How cruel. Children level slowly if properly cared for, and it is considered the mark of a precocious child that they level quickly, to keep them unleveled entirely. I cannot imagine it to be kind." The big elk man looked morose for a moment, then took a deep breath and continued. "But I do not know when this will expire. The next milestone is level 27, and that level is required for any proper adventurer. It is sometimes said that the time between level 9 and 27 is the most dangerous in anybody's life, for Davra rewards risk above all, and it is many levels to cross without the benefit of 6 full-class skills. It would not surprise me if that is where you will lose this disadvantaged trait." Nathan nodded, frowning. If level 27 was where he'd lose the buff, then he should push that off as long as he could, and try to pick up and develop as many talents and utility skills as possible. The skills were easy, but talents were a problem. Vihala had said that you could dump talents, but that the better ones, the ones that changed you, tended to be permanent. Both Nathan's magic resistance and his regeneration were permanent, so he didn't want to pick up just any talent. He wanted something that would fit into his developing build. The problem was, he didn't know what he needed or where to get it. Were there temporary talents he could take for now? Well, there were people he could ask right in front of him. "Do you have any advice for temporary talents I could take for my 3rd slot?" Arthur answered again, sounding as if going over a familiar topic. Taking a talent and intending to replace it later is a matter of some argument. Many say it is wise to become as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. However, I say that is trading greater strength later for smaller strength now. You will delay gaining a more powerful talent because you have developed a temporary talent, and may end up keeping the short-term talent because you cannot bear to replace it. To add to this, many talents tend to become permanent when developed beyond high tier. Finally, you may only receive talents when you have an empty slot, which means that if you unlock a talent in combat, you will not only be unable to accept it, you will never know you have done so. It is common practice to leave a talent slot open for such an eventuality, or for after the level 27 class development to round out a build. For these reasons, I do not recommend taking a temporary talent. Do you agree, Emerald? The thin figure bobbed their armored helmet, giving no other answer. Nathan shrugged. Regardless, it was time to move forward with what he had. He pulled up the box for his new skill and accepted it. "Congratulations, you have accepted the low-tier dodging footwork utility skill." There was one more question Nathan had for the two, though he primarily addressed Emerald. "Should I try to get armor? I took a heavy blow earlier during training, and it seems like I should wear armor." Emerald started nodding, their helmet reflecting the light. "Armor is good. I introduce," Arthur cut in, stroking his silvery beard as he spoke over Emerald. "I must interrupt. A weighty apology, Emerald, but this is a place where I must guide Nathan on the path of rage, and I would ask you to depart so we may speak of it in privacy." Arthur waited for Emerald to leave the room with the remains of their dinner before continuing. "There is an early branching in the path of rage, between those who fight armored and unarmored. If you fight and train to reach level 27 without wearing armor, while taking wounds, you will almost certainly gain a class skill that will enhance your toughness while unarmored, which holds obvious advantages for you. You have said you are unable to use enchanted items, and armor without enchantments holds limited use. You also seem to prize maneuverability and fast movement, which armor and especially unenchanted armor would hinder. Therefore, I recommend against armor for now, though you may give it more thought after class development. I hope your regeneration talent can protect you for now, and when you gain the class skill, I hope the benefits are worthy." "That sounds like a pretty good argument." Armor would be uncomfortable, heavy and annoying to clean anyways, and expensive. I'll probably need to buy more clothes though. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 22 Backgrounds and Warnings. Nathan caught up on what the rest of the giant traders were doing. They all had a bunch of obligations before they headed back into the wilds, beyond just commissioning better weapons with their new cash. Valhalla was apparently stuck in an endless gauntlet of family obligations. The Bows seemed to be a clan who did a lot of adventuring and catering to adventurers, and Artha joked that her list of dinner invitations was taller than she was. She was also expected to share a few insights with some kids against future favors. It sounded complicated in the way that only family politics could be, and Nathan wished her luck. Nobody had seen William since he disappeared into a wizard's tower called the Tower of Trickery, where he'd been trained. It was a bit of a strange cross between an orphanage and a magical school, and was run by a birdfolk mage called Gale Shullet. There seemed to be a lot of jokes about Gale and the Tower of Trickery, since they disdained attack spells and primarily focused on stealth, illusion and area control like William's mud spell. Okay, interesting. I was wondering why William seemed less focused on direct conflict than the enslavement mages from Giant's Rest. However, Gale was unquestionably recognized as one of the stronger adventurers of Gemor, leading a team called the Seven Fools. Her students had begun to prove their worth to the Adventurers Guild in recent years, in large part due to their ability to cast Message. After a friendly exchange of goodbyes, Nathan headed back to the training section of the Adventurers Guild. The cafeteria building was lit, and dinner was being cleared by a pudgy man with a perpetual smile on his face. He saw Nathan peeking around the door and gave a cheery wave. Nathan explored further into the building. In the back were classrooms, some of which were occupied by students discussing things. They all looked at Nathan when he poked his head in, staring silently until he left. Okay then. I guess some of the air's unapproachability has rubbed off on me. In the next layer back were the dormitories, divided into suites much like the one Nathan had stayed in with the giant traders. Most of the doors were closed, but one was open and Arl sat in a chair next to it. He was sharpening an enormous sword that was laid on a cloth across his knees. As Nathan turned the corner, Arl was looking over his shoulder and back into the room, smiling as he did so. He and his sister are just so pretty. Those eyebrows are amazingly sculpted, and that sword was ridiculous. Arl spotted him and stood, hefting the blade and slowly feeding it into his pouch. It was taller than Nathan was, much less Arl. Damn, with that much blade, no wonder it needed a lot of sharpening. As the wiry youth finished, he gestured for Nathan to follow him into the room. Sarah was sitting there, whittling what looked like arrow shafts. Arl spoke to Nathan. "We have returned early and expect the others back soon. Did your afternoon serve you well?" Nathan nodded. "It did. Artha is a good teacher and Emerald taught me a skill." He pointed to Sarah. "I'll be ready for that dodging practice tomorrow," she smiled. "Good, I'm looking forward to another person's movement to practice against. I know all the tendencies of this walking target." She affectionately swatted at her brother's shoulder as he came to sit next to her. "Now, I will tell you this because Kachai likely will not. Try to sleep early tonight, we will wake early, and both Kachai and Stella need less sleep than decent folk do. Don't let them keep you up." With that she went back to her whittling, her rapid knife movements somehow sending the wood scraps into a neat pile on the table in front of her. Arl looked put out. "Ah, you warn him of what Kacha will do, while we had to suffer it firsthand. He should have stumbled through his first full day with half a night of sleep as we did. It would be good practice." Sarah pointed her knife at him. "Beware this mean streak of yours, brother. It will be your undoing." But she tilted her head and waggled her eyebrows as she said it, which seemed to lessen the blow. Arl only laughed. Nathan spectated their interplay, amused. The two definitely seemed close. He was an only child, but few of the siblings he'd seen had been so friendly. They were making fun of each other, but there was no meanness to it. Then again, he hadn't known any twins, so who knew? Nathan didn't feel comfortable going to bed yet, even if he was tired. He wasn't so much physically tired, just mentally exhausted. So many new things had happened. He needed to process and think, but there just hadn't been time. Now's as good a time as any. He said his goodnights to the twins and then explored the rooms of the heirs. There were 5 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, again with the strange trough with running water. One of the bedrooms had no personal items, and Nathan claimed it as his own, laying out his stuff on the small table. It was a pitiful pile for being everything he owned in this new world. The knapsack he'd gotten from the Vanguard, packed with clothes and blankets, strings of coins, some knives, a few extra clothes. Back home he'd felt secure with his phone and wallet. It had been comforting to know that as long as he kept those 2 items, he'd manage decently well anywhere with civilization. Anywhere on Earth, that was. But all of that had been stripped away by Tial's spell. Now this meager pile of possessions was all he owned. However, it gave him a similar sense of security. He was starting to develop his place in this world, especially the coins. Starting from nothing, pulling myself up by my bootstraps, I'm such a capitalist. So much of it had been due to his friends here. He'd found allies and a purpose. The money and belongings were incidental. In general, life was less comfortable than it had been back on Earth, but Nathan wasn't sure he regretted the change. Life on Davrar was dangerous and often short, but Nathan remembered the intoxicating thrill of the fights he'd been a part of. Life here was exciting and adventurous. The night sky was a world, and Davrar was chock full of secrets to be explored, new things to learn. The extreme sports Nathan had done felt like child's play, a facsimile of the rush that was a real fight. There was no chair, so Nathan sat on the bed to meditate. He glossed over his experiences of the day. There was no rush, just examining each thought in turn until there was nothing left. Then Nathan focused on the breath until his mind felt clear. He began to examine the flow of his feelings. What did he feel like? After the last few days, he should be flushed with stress hormones, sick to his stomach. But he wasn't. He felt invigorated, strong. And underneath it all, like a hidden flame in the center of his being, was a banked ember of anger. Nathan examined that anger, studying it thoroughly. In this meditative state, he could dedicate the time to investigate. Why was he angry? What was the source? Was it justified? He remembered his introduction to Giant's Rest, the damning words from Tial's own mouth that had led Nathan to oppose him. Then there was the mindfuckery that he'd barely escaped. That had made it personal, and when Nathan had broken his restraints, Tial had cringed and fled. Coward. Fleeing the moment consequences could threaten him. Nathan breathed out, feeling like fire was escaping with each breath. There'd been the fight at the ford where the enslavement mages had gloated at the idea of recapturing Emerald, the escaped slave. Nathan's fury peaked and his arms trembled. He wanted to run to Giant's Rest and tear down their walls, break things until not one stone stood atop another. He breathed in, keeping his eyes closed. He breathed out, feeling the anger wash through him in waves. It felt purifying. It felt like it gave him strength. And on Earth, that would have been a lie. Here it was not. Artha's lessons made it clear that anger was a power, and a power that he could use. After a time, Nathan dropped back, clearing his mind and focusing only on his breathing. He breathed clean, cool air in through the nose, breathed out his rage through the mouth. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes. The anger wasn't gone, just receded, like a coal smoldering inside of him. Nathan was sure with a moment's thought he could call it back to him. Before him floated another blue box in acknowledgement of that. Pending utility skill. Anger control. You have demonstrated excellent control over your anger. This skill will help you control your anger in the future, allowing you to control your rage and direct it as you see fit. Artha had warned him about this. It could be a useful skill to somebody on the path of rage, to be sure. Nathan would have been wary of taking it because it gave Davrar control over his emotions, but Artha had further cautioned him against it. His tribe had learned that those who took skills to control their rage ended up weakened. Their anger became a shallower thing, a switch to be turned on and off, and their future classes were weaker. So, Nathan refused the skill. He rested on the bed for a little longer, thinking about the day. He seemed to be doing all right with the heirs, if only by not taking their bait. Being the serious adult seemed to be paying off. That situation seemed fine, and he'd known them for less than a day. They seemed all right. Still a bit of that teenage idiocy, but they wanted to be serious. Well, Nathan still had traces of adrenaline in him from his meditation on anger, but he should heed Sarah's advice and try to sleep. At least there aren't computer screens keeping me awake anymore. Nathan rested, feeling at peace with the day. He lamented only that he hadn't gotten more of a chance to explore Gemor to see the novelties of Davrar. But there were good arguments for learning to defend himself as rapidly as possible, and here was where that happened. Chapter 23, Basic Education. True to Sarah's word, the next morning started early. There was a pounding on Nathan's door and Kachai's enthusiastic voice sounded loudly. "Get up, lead foot, we're headed out. Don't hold us up." Nathan heard a chuckle, then the pounding resumed. Nathan had been warned about this, so his clothes were laid out and ready. Less than a minute after waking up, Nathan unbolted the door and stepped out. Kachai hid his surprise well, but seemed a bit put out that Nathan was up and dressed so quickly. Nathan hurried through his morning ablutions and emerged into the common room to find everybody just finishing getting ready. Stella and Kachai were almost insultingly bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, with Arl and Sarah visibly annoyed about it. What followed was a series of exercises that reminded Nathan of descriptions of boot camp training. It had clearly taken on the form of a ritual to the heirs as well. Calisthenics, running several loops around the training hall before taking on some of the obstacle courses in the pre-dawn light. Nathan kept up, if only by leaning on sprinting and spending stamina freely. They hadn't eaten yet, so it wasn't replenishing much, even when they did stop to take a breather. The group was clearly used to pushing each other, and while Stella lagged in the running, she didn't drag or fall behind. Nathan did notice that there was something wonky going on with her run, as if each step was propelled by extra force. Kachai led the exercises, disgustingly cheerful as he vaulted over obstacles in full plate, calling out to everybody in a sing-song chant. Nathan wanted to resent him for it, but the wolffolk just seemed to be having so much fun with it. Nathan didn't want to snark at his good mood, even if he wasn't a morning person himself. After their exercises, they trooped into the dining hall as it opened up. The same pudgy man was depositing trays of food on the buffet table. The food looked basic but delicious. Meat, eggs, starchy tubers, and piles of vegetables in a rich gravy. The chef winked at them, wiping his hands on a stained apron as he walked out the door to fetch another load. The heirs loaded up their plates and sat at the same central table as before. Nathan asked the heirs to stash food in their various magical holding items for him to use later, and they acquiesced with humor. Kachai joked that he wished he could replenish his faith resource by eating instead of praying, but then he smugly mentioned that faith allowed for miracles, and he didn't see stamina pulling off any of those. Nathan waved his left arm at Kachai dismissively. "I think regrowing an arm is pretty miraculous." Other teams were filtering in, but it didn't seem like anybody else had the morning exercise routine of the heirs. Nathan asked about it, and apparently Kachai had inherited it from his mother. The parents of the other heirs had leaned on them to participate, and now it was a habit. Stella did an impression of her father extracting a promise from her, clasping her hands in front of her before softly and seriously saying, "For no matter the power of the mage, sometimes it is smart to run away very quickly." And you can't fly yet, so you can't use that as an excuse like we can. Nathan noticed that he wasn't sore after the morning's exercises, probably regeneration healing his muscles. Nathan wanted to find out if that strengthened them or not, but it was something he'd need to keep an eye on over time. Maybe tomorrow he should bring a snack and try to test it out. Next they were off to classes and bid each other farewell. Nathan headed to his lesson on reading and writing and received some ribbing for needing to learn to read. His response was sarcastic. "I know how to read and write perfectly well, thank you very much. Just not in whatever the local language is. You don't even use the characters I'm used to. Very rude. You should just use the 26 characters I'm used to." Nathan spent a few hours with Velek, the clerk who had taken him to the guildmistress, learning the characters of the local system. It was a phonetic alphabet with only 20 characters, but there were 4 modifiers that could be used to change some pronunciations enough that it was closer to 35. At least the modifiers were standardized. In fact, the alphabet seemed less like something that evolved naturally, and more like something somebody had designed at some point. There weren't as many idiosyncrasies as there should have been in a naturally evolving language, and the use of the 4 modifiers was too systematic. So, I don't exactly have proof, and even if I did, it doesn't mean a lot. The Korean alphabet was also designed by some king who decided to design it from the ground up to be easy to use. It worked too. Nathan was just glad it wouldn't be too difficult to properly learn the language Tial's spell had taught him to speak. After that, Nathan was reunited with the heirs in a large room with all of the other trainees for their next class. Jalba stomped into the room, freezing side conversations with a stern look, and lectured them on the rules of adventurers. It was a dry list of responsibilities, expectations, and privileges, but Nathan found the new information fascinating. As adventurers, they were neither free agents nor entirely in service to Gemor. It was more like committing to some amount of public service, which was tracked, and receiving special privileges in return. They would be provided housing, basic necessities, and the adventurer discount while being active adventurers, but were expected to take up jobs in a reasonable time frame and work not for their own enrichment but for the good of Gemor. Jalba emphasized this multiple times, his favorite example being an anonymous adventurer given the choice between finding a magic item and stopping a ravening monster, called a muckgrabber, from entering a town. You end the threat, protect those depending on you. That's the job. If you don't like it, go somewhere else and be a treasure hunter. But that's not what it means to be an adventurer of Gemor. From context and some nearby mutters, Nathan gathered that these weren't old traditions. This mindset was something that Jalba and the guildmistress were trying to bake into the next generation. And while the heirs seemed to be on board, it was clear that not everybody was. Regardless, it's a sentiment I can get behind. This isn't my city, and I don't understand all the complexities here, but the general culture seems pretty obsessed with machismo, and I'm in favor of people trying to change that. Macho behavior doesn't usually translate to responsible conduct. The rest of the day proceeded much like the previous one, with Nathan settling further into the group. He was still an object of attention, but the trials of the previous day had mostly settled the heir's doubts. When Katja tried to suggest another spar, Stella shut him down hard and announced that Nathan would practice with Sarah. She proposed an alternate plan. "Yeah, you big, strong warriors should hammer away at each other with your oversized hunks of metal. It's what you're good at." Sparring with Sarah was a learning experience for Nathan. He'd sparred in martial arts, but it had been with pads and for points. And while the lessons applied, the availability of easy healing made this an altogether different experience. They fought to surrender or incapacitation, and it should have been a grueling, awful experience. Sarah wasn't being brutal, and she was pointing out his mistakes, but she also wasn't holding back. Nathan had his wrists broken, his ribs cracked, and his nose crushed more than a few times. But Brawler's indifference and regeneration made the experience rather tolerable. He could ignore the pain and shock of the injuries to continue the fight while quickly healing the damage. Before long, he was digging into the stashes of food to replenish his stamina. Nathan wasn't entirely sure why he could just keep eating and replenish stamina. But no argument here. There was plenty of food, and it was well spiced enough that Nathan wasn't getting bored of it. If I keep eating food this spicy, maybe I'll pick up a talent for fire breathing. At first, Nathan held back his more vicious blows, but over time he learned that Sarah was superhumanly fast and flexible. So he restrained himself less, taking openings for crippling blows as they were presented. Going all out felt great, and Nathan was thrilled by the spar. It wasn't the same all-consuming rush as his earlier life-or-death fights, but it had a bit of the same taste. A taste he hadn't felt in spars at home. Those had been dominated by the need for safety. After adjusting, Nathan started landing hits on Sarah. His larger build and use of stamina made his blows hit hard, and Sarah had to be careful to properly block or dodge nearly every one of his attacks. Between rounds, Stella healed minor injuries like bruises and black eyes, though she was visibly uncomfortable doing it. She frowned at Sarah's face as one particularly nasty black eye diminished. Nathan took the opportunity to ask, "Stella, what's going on? Is there anything wrong with the healing?" She shook her head, continuing to watch the progress of the spell. "No, it's just that the curing spells are Davrar's. You channel basic mana in a specific shape and then the person heals. It's really not magic. It's like a cheat. A lot of mages don't notice, but there's no way this mana shape is doing the healing. You can tweak the curing a little bit with the right inputs, but the changes make no sense, aside from more mana making the healing faster. It's like you're tying a useless knot with mana, but then a wound heals." The mage glared at the spell as if it personally offended her. "The magic doesn't make sense. My mom tells me that it'd be impossible to heal people without it, but I don't like having no idea how the spell actually works. Kachai's faith is better at this kind of nonsense anyway, but Mom says I need to practice. It's just that there's no rhythm behind this spell, and I don't know why some things work better than others. I like to understand why my spells do what they do." Nathan nodded. That frustration made sense to him, but so did Davrar's guidance of healing spells. Bodies were complicated, and healing a wound in seconds was very different from detonating out mana like a fireball. This was exactly the kind of interesting puzzle Nathan would love to tackle, if he used magic, which he did not. So he smiled sympathetically and said, "Yeah, that sounds frustrating. Maybe it just takes time to become comfortable using the spell on injuries." Stella shrugged at his words, clearly wanting to avoid the topic. She went back to healing the injury, carefully gazing into Sarah's eyes to be sure there wasn't any lasting damage. Then they went back to training. Low-tier dodging footwork too achieved. Only Nathan's lowest strength skill had gotten better, but he'd been warned about that. While this training was somewhat dangerous, it barely counted to Davrar. On the other hand, Nathan had definitely learned more about taking and dealing blows personally, even if Davrar hadn't rewarded him for it. This practice had been so much more visceral than sparring. Nathan felt like he was getting a handle on the sudden bursts of rapid movement involved when people fought to injure and maim. There wasn't that moment of hesitation involved where a strike was pulled or a kick was checked. He headed to training with Artha in high spirits, and the elk man talked Nathan's ear off about the path of rage. Nathan was approaching his second-class development. It was even possible that he'd hit level 27 with a few months of dedicated training. But if a deadly fight happened, he was certain to hit that milestone. Therefore, Artha was trying to stuff years of accumulated knowledge and practice into Nathan before that happened, so he'd be most likely to get the best class he could get. Nathan returned to bed that night feeling tired but fulfilled once again. He settled into his meditation without a goal. He was working towards purposes on multiple fronts and felt satisfied with his progress. So he set aside his thoughts, quieted his inner dialogue, and drifted, at ease in his mind. Eventually, he readied himself for bed and slept better than he had on Earth in some years. Chapter 24, finally, a time skip over the next several days, Nathan's interactions became more cordial with the other members of the heirs. He didn't complain at their strenuous exercise and practice, and joined in to push them forward as he adapted to the schedule. In fact, he started pushing harder than any of them. Nathan started requesting that they squirrel away extra food in their dimensional bags so he could replenish his stamina. They made fun of him for it, but it was more good-natured jokes about the stupid amounts of food Nathan was eating. Stella in particular had innumerable dimensional pockets in her robes, and Nathan had yet to deplete those bottomless depths of snacks. He was still somewhat of an outsider in the group. The heirs had known each other for years, and Nathan couldn't expect to overcome that in a mere week. But the barriers of awkwardness were breaking down in both directions. Nathan didn't feel the need to consider every joke, and felt freer in having fun with each member of the heirs. He felt the closest to Stella, who regarded Nathan and his magic resistance as something wondrous and special. It was hard to resist a pretty girl paying you special attention, even if she was a few years younger. She started practicing increasingly lethal spellwork with Nathan, and soon enough he was dodging storms of firebolts, being inundated in jets of fire and shattering layers of force shields. Stella especially prized the time they spent directly contesting her spellwork, saying it was fantastic training for making her spells more resilient and controlled. Kachai was trying to be friendly, regarding it important to be on good terms with every member of his team, but he clearly had a chip on his shoulder and was bad at being diplomatic. Sarah was kind, and to some extent the most relatable. Stella and Kachai were driven and intimidating in their devotion to practice. They each spent a lot of time on their own practicing their magic disciplines with single-minded determination. This also translated to spending more evenings with their parents, undergoing specialized training, or just spending time with family. Therefore, Nathan spent several evenings hanging out with Sarah and Arl, trading jokes with Sarah about their schooling and practice as Arl dourly maintained his arsenal, or joined his sister in whittling new weapons. Arl could be a bit brooding, and tended to avoid conversation unless forced to engage. When he did butt in it, was usually with a comment so wry that Nathan had to stop and appreciate the levels of sarcasm on display. He still hadn't seen much of the world outside of the Adventurers Guild and the training complex, but that wasn't for the worst. Nathan was learning how to survive Davrar, and it would be hard to find somewhere safer than the training grounds of the Adventurers Guild, despite the bruises, sprains, and broken bones he received while training. After almost a fortnight, his skills and talents were advancing, but seemingly very slowly. Mid-tier regeneration rank 8 achieved. Mid-tier regeneration rank 9 achieved. Low-tier sprinting 7 achieved. Low-tier spell sense 7 achieved. Mid-tier focused mind rank 6 achieved. Low-tier identify 4 achieved. Low-tier dodging footwork 3 achieved. Low-tier dodging footwork 4 achieved. His fastest growing skill was regeneration, which was not surprising given all of the healing Nathan was doing. And it wasn't just the injuries sustained during practice. It also included the muscle soreness gained from the frankly ridiculous amount of exercise Nathan was doing, both in morning and afternoon sessions. Stamina let him push his muscles farther, and regeneration let them recover nearly instantly. He wasn't benchmarking his progress especially carefully, and they weren't doing a ton of resistance training, but Nathan's muscles were getting quite defined. He could leap straight to the top of the walls on the obstacle course and could easily block even powerful strikes from Kachai's hammer, provided he had a weapon of his own. He didn't want to say he was the strongest member of the heirs, but with his stamina, it was definitely true. Nathan meditated most nights, using focused mind and spell sense to help him understand more of Stella's spells. As he understood a spell, he got faster and more efficient at breaking it. The more he practiced understanding magic, the more it felt like the right direction to develop his magic resistance. He tried to develop magic resistance to the next tier, but even with focused mind and Stella's assistance in hitting him with spells, he hadn't had a breakthrough. High-tier skills and talents were hard to develop, and Nathan figured it was his lack of experience with a broad array of magic that was causing a problem. He could probably develop his talent to be excellent at dealing with force and fire magic, and maybe the shadow and earth magic that he'd practiced with William. But the more general a talent, the more useful it was. He mentioned this problem to Stella, who said she'd try to convince her parents to help him out. Nathan was looking forward to getting regeneration to rank 10 so he could work on developing it. He had some concrete ideas about how to do it. He wasn't sure how to try to focus the development, maybe making his healing faster or cheaper. He could probably angle the regeneration that way by focusing on either more cells differentiating, or by guiding the process more with his understanding of what differentiation entailed. Alternatively, if his focus was on using regeneration in a fight, then maybe it would be better to make it automatic, so he didn't have to focus attention to heal. He was also well aware that he was weak to poisons. However, that was enough divorced from the insight of guided cell differentiation that underlaid his regeneration, that his talent would need to be past high tier to handle it. Regardless, he had to wait for the talent to rank up, which was proceeding slowly. His reading lessons with Velik had been going reasonably well. After a few days of study, he'd been offered the low-tier reading skill. Nathan had almost declined it without a second thought. He didn't need to spend a precious skill on reading. Reading was something he could manage on his own without any Davrar-granted assistance. Thank you very much. Then he'd given it another thought. If he developed the skill, he could learn to read incredibly quickly, and maybe even develop it to read other languages, or there was a lot of potential, and Nathan wasn't sure of the limits. He hadn't learned any details about what was possible with a reading skill from Velik or Artha. In the end, he left it open. The biggest problem was that there didn't seem to be all that many books around. He also probably didn't have too many utility skill slots left and wanted to be careful how he assigned them going forward. But if he had a free slot, then reading was certainly something to consider. A few days later, Nathan approached one of his mentors about it. "Artha, what are the rules for acquiring utility skills?" The big elk man looked down at Nathan with a thoughtful expression. "Davrar will offer a utility skill for a task you are already proficient in. This is especially true if you are using the skill to help with a dangerous situation. However, Davrar is unlikely to offer you skills similar to those you already possess." He thought for a moment longer, staring off into space. "Such lessons are basic, and I often forget you were not taught in childhood. Skills usable in combat are more difficult to acquire, and skills become harder to gain the more of them you have. Trying to get a skill will make you more likely to get it. It is rather uncommon for any but a child to be offered a skill they were not working for, or those who are disadvantaged, apparently." He gave Nathan a slight nod before begging off. "I must return to the hall, for I am to meet a young treeborn new to the city. Farewell, Nathan." Jalba's classes in the mornings were another great source of knowledge for Nathan. The grizzled adventurer didn't always teach. They'd had some other adventurers or clerks in for lessons on geography and the bestiary of different monsters around Gemor. They didn't teach much history. The closest thing was descriptions of the different kinds of dungeons they might face, along with some details about the cultures that had produced those ruins. Apparently, the cults of Quaz had been a necromantic cult that had built chapels and tombs over sites of mass death, suppressing and controlling the naturally occurring mana, and undead that tended to issue from such places. They'd served to contain dangers and make the countryside safer, or at least they had. Now, many of their seals had broken or reached critical mass, and regularly unleashed dangerous undead. They were widely considered some of the most dangerous dungeons around. In most cases, the deaths had happened so long ago that the site wouldn't be magical if it wasn't for the Quaz constructs perpetuating the death mana. It was possible to enter and safely dissipate the necromantic mana before destroying those dungeons. However, the job was dangerous, especially if the built-up mana went out of control over an ancient mass grave. Nathan had had a front row seat when the Grey Moon Order had failed to prevent that in a monastery of Quaz on Delve Day. It wasn't exactly front row, but even the nosebleed seats are too close to a mountain-sized monster, and what kind of death event leaves behind enough bodies for that? There's history there, but the cults of Quaz were just the first example. There were dozens of other types of dangerous ruins and dungeons. The fortresses of the face had been way stations and strongholds to a long-forgotten civilization, and were built around powerful artifacts that siphoned mana from leylands to power defensive wards and spells. Only now, they were usually lairs of powerful monsters or nests that had started feeding on that mana, gaining powers and aspects of their mana source. The Edrani Empire was another ancient nation that had heavily enchanted all of their buildings. The enchantments served to reinforce stonework, pump water, or summon armies of elemental or ghostly guardians, control automatic traps, and more. Dungeoneering was both an art and a science, where you used history and archaeology to understand the construction of ancient cities and fortresses built by paranoid architects with access to insane resources, who wanted to ensure that their city fortress research center would not fall. And they all fell anyway. Now Davrar is covered with hundreds of miles of monster-infested wilderness strewn with dangerous ruins. That's not a good sign, is it? Finally, there were Nathan's lessons with Artha. They continued to be interesting, with a mix of theoretical concepts, mental exercises, and physical practice. Artha had described to Nathan some of what his clan knew, but there was a lot to cover. Typically, somebody had years to prepare for class developments. Artha described how the young members of his clan tended to gather around fires in the evening to hear elders teach them of the path. A lot of the knowledge was certainly useful, like avoiding armor to develop an unarmored defense skill, or to not take an anger management skill. Some of it was also likely superstitious. One such example was the practice of holding a body part close to a fire until it was almost, but not quite burnt. According to Artha, the idea was to feel the resonance between fire and anger, and that it would help you improve the rage skill. Then he admitted that it was more a game that young Treeborn played to demonstrate how cool they were. Nathan wasn't planning on bothering with that one. The indicator of a class on the path of rage was a skill centered around consuming a class resource, usually stamina, in order to fuel a rage state. While active, the rage enhanced strength, speed, and toughness substantially. The trio of advantages was apparently a big deal. Many fighting-type classes gave skills that permanently or temporarily enhanced strength, speed, or durability, but no other class enhanced all three at once with a single skill. Furthermore, it was quite uncommon for classes to enhance more than one of the three before level 81. The primary downsides were the altered mental state, and that usage spent the class resource. Arthur and Nathan had discussed what class skills he should go for at some length. At level 27, he would pick up 3 new ones. They were aiming for rage and unarmored toughness with the first 2. With those skills, Nathan should be very resistant to mundane weapons. They weren't sure if his magic resistance would deal with magical weapons, but he could hope. The third of the new class skills was still up in the air. They talked about a few options, from some ways to passively increase Nathan's strength, recover stamina, or discount the stamina costs of rage. That last option was one of Arthur's favorites, and Nathan had to agree. Class skills to recover stamina were also appealing, but most of the ones that Arthur knew were difficult and required 4 legs, so Arthur didn't get into them. As a result, Arthur had Nathan doing exercises to practice keeping his anger present, raging in his mind while not being all-consuming. Nathan didn't like how it felt, but he kept up the exercises regardless, since that was a way to get a skill that discounted rage. Arthur also mentioned that sometimes the best practice was to not try to plan out every detail, allowing circumstance and Davrar to fill in the last pieces of a build. At the very least, Nathan would be confronted with a list of choices for how his class would develop, similarly to when he had first developed his class at level 9. But class developments were developments of the previous class, so he wouldn't be able to make a hard pivot and become a scholarly class like he'd been offered before. Regardless, Nathan was satisfied with his efforts. Chapter 25. A Mage's Mansion. The next evening, Nathan had returned to the suite and was idly chatting with Sarah about different kinds of weapons used by adventurers. He had learned in the last few days that Sarah and Arl's father Stanel Crusens was a famous weapon master. He'd retired from adventuring after the death of his wife to raise Sarah and Arl and run the training for the Gemor Guard. He was famous for being a master of literally any weapon he laid his hands on. So when you reach the higher levels, a lot of strange weapons become usable. There was this orc trader from Agman who had some skills related to chains, so his main weapon was this 100-foot chain with heavy metal balls every couple of feet. He could wrap somebody up in a snap, knock down a building, or sling a boulder half a mile. There are still tools better at each of those tasks, but it's a good example of a specialist who doesn't sacrifice too much. Better than an idiot with a sword larger than he is. The real trick is getting class skills that are useful at low levels and let you explore more esoteric things at higher levels. The last part was partially directed at her brother, who was frowning at a scroll while he worked through a math problem. Nathan wasn't sure if he should help Arl with the math. It looked like relatively simple arithmetic and multiplication, though there was definitely some geometry involved. Nathan still couldn't read standard text very well, much less mathematical notation. Something to revisit after he could read. There was an awful lot on that list. Velek was planning on testing his general knowledge once they'd addressed the reading problem, so that would be a good way to compare Gemor's education to Earth's. To be fair, I was working on the highest form of qualification my world offers. That being said, the heirs have probably had about the best education you can get around here, but they really don't need as extensive a math education as I do. Well, I don't regret learning multivariable calculus. It was a required class and worthwhile to understand Maxwell's equations. Stella bounced into the room, returned from a longer tutoring session and dinner with her parents. Kachai followed closely behind, looking resigned. Nathan could tell by his drooping ears. Stella seemed especially enthusiastic. "Hey Nathan, you know how you wanted to get more exposure to different kinds of magic? Well, my parents have invited you to our house tomorrow. It should be interesting for everybody." Nathan blinked at her, taken aback by the enthusiasm. He opened his mouth to blandly accept, but was interrupted by Kachai. "I'm pretty sure it's going to be 2 of the most powerful spellcasters in Gemor trying to take you apart for a few hours. the wolffolk explained in a dry tone. "I'd rather go a few rounds with a rotting hulk." And she left out that her parents are also having a dinner party afterwards, with all of us and our parents in attendance. "You'll be the object of attention, that's as sure as the sun." Nathan looked to Sarah and Arl. "Is that bad?" "That sounds like it's bad." Arl looked up from his chalk slate with a sharp grin. "They do these dinner parties every month or so. I'd forgotten that it was happening tomorrow. There'll be great food and the best adventurers around swapping stories. Don't worry too much about it. If you accidentally insult Stanel and he chops off a limb, you can always grow it back." This was not particularly reassuring to Nathan, but the first part did sound like it might be a good time to learn a lot more about magic, and potentially even develop his magic resistance talent. As for the dinner, well, Nathan took a deep breath. He had a choice. He could stress about it and try to badger the rest of his team with questions to prepare, or he could just not worry about it and hope it wouldn't be a problem. Not only was there not much he could do, if he got himself worked up about it, then he might create a problem where none needed to exist. So Nathan settled down and asked Kache about his mother's intensive tutoring, while Stella made her way over to help Arl with his math. She was apparently quite good at math. The next morning, things proceeded as normal morning exercises, obstacle courses, breakfast, and lessons. Nathan met back up with the heirs for lunch, which was primarily some sort of gamey loin stuffed with pepper-like vegetables and a dark, salty sauce. Practice proceeded as normal, with some sprinting drills and hand-to-hand combat. Nathan wasn't really able to stand up to Koch or Arl in a fight, but it certainly wasn't because he lacked strength. They've been learning to fight since they could walk, and it shows. The gap of skill is immense. At the end of the session, Kochai wished Nathan an emotional farewell. "Nathan, I wish you luck in your upcoming challenges. I hope to see you well if you can survive." Stella glared at him, struggling to keep a smile off her face. She eventually reached up and flicked the side of his helmet, some kind of force spell making it ring like a bell. And with that, Nathan was off, following the much shorter Stella across the courtyard to where her parents stood apart from all of the other mentors who were there to collect trainees. At first glance, the old foxfolk and gentle-faced man with deep smile lines seemed unremarkable. Cull's fur was heavily streaked with gray, and Dalo's hair and wispy beard were entirely white. Their robes were more richly colored and decorated than most, though not the resplendent colors Nathan had first seen as they'd flown overhead after reducing the grave tangle to a bad-smelling trash fire. Nathan took a second to remember what he knew of them. Right. It's Cull and Dalo Caxau. They're married and Stella has talked about them some. Cull is the foxfolk and specializes in force magic, especially protective barriers. Dalo is the white-haired guy and specializes in big elemental spells and fusion reactions, though they're high enough level that they're definitely proficient at more than one thing. Stella said her mom is good with light magic, and Dalo's got incredibly fine control of enormous elemental spells when he needs it. They drew near and Cull embraced Stella in a hug. It looked very soft. Meanwhile, Dalo stepped up to Nathan and offered him a handshake with a gentle smile. Nathan spoke first, using a form of respect he'd learned from the orange-skinned clerk Velek as he bowed his head lightly over Dalo's hand. "Archmage Caxau, it is a good day for a first meeting. Your daughter has been a great help to my development. I'm lucky to be on her team." The man's smile grew wider. "And from what she said, she's lucky you joined. My daughter has said a few things about the talents you have, and I would be in error if I said I am not curious." Dalo combed his fingers through his trailing beard. "But here is not the place for such talks. If my wife has finished greeting our daughter." Dalo stepped over to give Stella a hug of his own. Cull turned to Nathan, tilting her head back to look at him. Nathan held out his hand, but she brushed by it to give him a hug too. Nathan hesitated a moment before returning the gesture, gently wrapping his arms around the diminutive woman in front of him. It was very soft. After a moment she stepped back. "Well, now that we've been properly introduced, let's get moving. I know Stella has high hopes for this afternoon. Come along." As they were leaving the Adventurers Guild, Stella asked, "Who's going to be at the dinner tonight? And what's the food?" Dalo gave her an indulgent smile. "You'll find out who is there when they get there. But we've hired Cantas for tonight and given her the freedom she wants. I'm sure it will be memorable if you can avoid the decorative flower arrangements." Stella laughed and turned back to Nathan. "Cantas is the best chef in Gemor, though she sometimes puts things that aren't food on the table. I think the last time she cooked, Kia ended up actually exhaling flames, though I've never been sure if that was the dish or just Dad playing a prank." She elbowed Dalo, who held up his hands placatingly. "Everybody must have their secrets, especially once they reach my level. Come now, let us hurry. It sounded like you had more ideas than we will have time to try, my daughter." After exiting the guild, they turned and started climbing the hill that Gemor was built on. The streets were steep, and in many cases had large stones laid flat to form steps. Most of the houses were cut into the hill or standing on platforms so they could remain flat. The occasional crossing road switchbacked up the hill, allowing wheeled carts and wagons to climb to the higher districts without having to go straight up the slope. As they climbed, Nathan turned his head, his eyes drawn to a building just down the road. There was a man leaning against the doorway looking at Nathan, and their eyes met. The man was pale and wiry underneath light chainmail. He had an unstrung bow and a quiver on his back and a short sword on each hip, while his face was rough with several days of stubble. The man held Nathan's gaze for a moment, and Nathan felt like he was being intensely studied for weaknesses. He opened his mouth to ask Dalo and Kullal, but the moment he did, the man stepped into the building and was gone. "Could be a man curious about who I am because I'm walking around with this company. But I think I'm going to trust my gut on this one. He was looking for me. But I highly doubt anybody's going to try anything when I'm with this family. I'll have to be cautious and not go out into the city on my own." Low tier notice rank 8 achieved. As they continued to ascend the hill of Gemor, Nathan looked around for more suspicious activity. His attention was caught by Dalo pointing off to the side at a jewelry shop. "I would say that place is newly opened, but I realize I haven't walked this road properly in years. Dear wife, maybe we should spend more time on the streets of the city we've sworn to protect. But flight is so convenient and easy." Kullal responded. She paused, tilting her head one way and then another. "I do see your angle. It's easy to be stuck in our ways when we fly from our house to our favorite bar and then to the guild. Maybe we should find some time to explore. Just like the first time I came to the city, I remember you were so excited to show me the sights. Now there may be new sights for us both." Dalo drew his wife into a hug and kissed her before responding. "It is an idea we should hold on to, but I think Kia is planning another ranging. I'm sure we'll hear about it tonight." He chuckled and bent to kiss her again, but Stella interrupted. "Hey, don't forget we're here. You haven't met Nathan for more than 5 minutes and now you're not only ignoring him but also being too that." She waved her hand at her embracing parents. Kullal snuggled further into Dalo. "Well, if Nathan's going to spend time with us, he should know what to expect. Though we have been ignoring him, for which I tender a faint apology." She nodded in his direction, before spinning away from her husband and leading them up the street. Nathan replied, throwing his arms wide to gesture to everything around them. "No worries. I'm glad to get out and see the city. I'd previously only been in the area around the Adventurers Guild, but there's definitely more to Gemor. However, I'd be curious to ask what you have planned for this afternoon." "Stella goes with you every day for magic tutoring, but I can't imagine that's what you have planned for me." Dalo chuckled. "Indeed not. As much as many mages would cut off their hand for some tutoring from us, that's not what the plan is today. From what Stella has said, you have a very peculiar and shockingly general talent to resist magic. That's not something we've heard of before in all of our years of adventuring, so we're quite curious. And if you need exposure to more spells and mana types to help develop the talent, so much the better. They made some more small talk, climbing further into Gemor until they turned down a side street. They stopped before a small mansion that was set a little back from the street, behind a low wall of dark stone. Regularly spaced pillars stood atop the wall, sparking like Tesla coils. They didn't have the loud pops that Nathan usually associated with that kind of display, but it was certainly eye-catching. In front of the mansion was a verdant garden decorated by trees bearing glowing fruit and bushes covered in patterned flowers. Cullel stepped forward and waved a hand, opening a scrollwork wrought iron gate and summoning thin planes of force on either side of it to protect them from the lightning. She didn't say any spell names. Stella doesn't usually either. I have no idea if that's a skill or just a different way of casting magic. Nathan walked through the garden, momentarily dazzled by the sudden feeling of being in a jungle. Then they entered the house, which was large but cozy. Warm, polished wood gleamed from most surfaces, and fires crackled in almost every room without consuming any wood. Nathan's head swiveled back and forth, taking in the indisputably lavish surroundings. I suppose being the best adventurers around pays pretty well, and requires a shockingly good security system. The group proceeded through a short hallway and descended into a richly carpeted lounge area that was clearly a viewing area for the space beyond. A series of padded benches were separated by a low wall from a large, empty room with walls of sturdy stone. The empty space had a series of training dummies on one wall and a large ring marked on the bare stone floor. Stella took the lead, walking down an aisle and pushing open a small gate into the stone-floored training space. She conjured a flame and started tossing it from hand to hand, clearly excited as she whispered something to her mother. Nathan made to follow her but stopped when Dalo put a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Pardon, but I wish to ask some questions before we begin. I'm afraid I'm not entirely comfortable with providing aid to somebody we know so little about. Nathan, is there anything you can tell me about yourself to lighten my mind? Where you are from or what your goals are, for example?" Nathan looked back at the kindly man behind him. Dalo's face wore a neutral expression, but his eyes were focused unerringly on Nathan's. Nathan remembered the first time he'd met this man's eyes and the blinding glare they'd held then. He could see that spark in Dalo's eyes now, and it was a reminder that no matter his magic resistance, his friend's father could probably obliterate him, and whatever hill I'm currently standing on. Nathan took a deep breath, activating focused mind to push away a fearful shudder and plan his next words carefully. Then he spoke. "I swear to you on my word and my honor that I have no ill intentions for you, your daughter or Gemor as a whole. You have saved my life, and I do not wish to betray that gift. I was abducted from my home by a Giant's Rest archmage, and narrowly escaped enslavement at his hands. I may seek to return home eventually, but for now my goal is to fight Giant's Rest." He spread his hands wide. "I will never forgive Tial for what he tried to do to me, and beyond him, the entire culture of Giant's Rest seems focused around disregarding the agency and personhood of others. My ultimate goal is to see their philosophy destroyed, the elite of Giant's Rest dead or scattered. It seems the only way to prevent them from enslaving all around them is with force." Then Nathan waved around the room, encapsulating the city. "I also wish to find a home on Davrar, and Gemor seems like a pretty nice place." Lotir earnestness rank 9 achieved. Dalo studied him for a moment longer, pursing his lips slightly. Then he released Nathan's shoulder and stepped back, his expression changing to a sad smile. "I understand, many who escape Giant's Rest wish them destroyed. They are an enemy of Gemor. See that your desire leaves space for caution, and I would warn you to not drag my daughter or the other heirs into a doomed fight. They are to be our heirs, not fodder for your crusade. If they decide to help topple the city of giants, let it be when they are older, wiser, and more powerful. But our purpose here today aligns with both of our goals, so let us proceed.